Welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, the podcast that explores the people, the innovations, and the ideas building the next generation of surrogacy. Today, we are joined by someone truly at the helm of the legal side of this field and whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for a few years. Please welcome Miss Sheriann Hicks. She is the founder of the Hicks Law Group in Georgia and a nationally recognized expert in assisted reproduction and surrogacy law. She is a fellow and past president of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys, and also the past president of the Georgia Council. And today she's going to share hard-earned insights about how attorneys and agencies can work together seamlessly, which agency tools set the table properly for the attorney, when to involve the attorney, spoiler, much earlier than you think, and how to spot red flags when matches come over underprepared. So with that, welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, Sheriann.
Hi, how are you?
I'm excited to have you on. I think this is going to be great both for attorneys that listen to the podcast, but also for the agencies that listen to the podcast.
I agree.
But before we get into it, I don't feel like I've ever known why you got started in this family building assisted reproduction side of law.
Sure, great question. So I've been doing adoptions for about 30 years, and about 10 years ago, you started hearing more and more about surrogacy being an alternative to building families. And so they're really very similar because you're working with families, you're forming families, but there's such less risk, I guess is the best way to say it, with a surrogacy journey than with an adoption journey. Where I live, smaller town. I'm outside of Atlanta. So my courts were not as familiar with surrogacy. And even the courts of Georgia weren't really familiar with it 15, 20 years ago. They're doing that in California and it was all movie stars, right? Famous people, really rich people. But slowly over time, it grew. And I had a mentor attorney tell me, you have to be in this conversation. You have to be able to pivot into this because this is what the future is going to hold. So with that, I started kind of wading into the waters. I started with doing a lot of contract reviews first so that I would familiarize myself with the contracts and the language and the process. And then, that's egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, and then got comfortable representing gestational carriers in contract review. I love gestational carriers because they do what they say. They're just really lovely to work with. And then, of course, the intended families have such great stories, as well. I mean, it's a journey that they've been on. Oftentimes, they're not really great stories because they've been struggling with infertility, but I do like to help people. And so I think this just meshed right with my personality.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. I'm an organ donor and I can't understand why people wouldn't be an organ donor. And so if I have something I can give to somebody, I want to do it. So I feel like I
Right.
would have been a surrogate had I been able to carry a child.
Well, and that's funny you say that because I just would tease my sister and say she had a little bit of trouble getting pregnant and had some miscarriages. And I said, I can do this for you. Like, I am totally fine to carry a baby for you if you need me to.
Yeah. Do you remember, I'm just curious when you first started looking at these contracts, because when I first started looking into surrogacy and how the contracts are built, I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
these are intense.
There's a lot. And that's why I started with reviewing first, because literally I read almost the whole contract to my clients. Now, I've gotten better at it, of course, and it takes about an hour and a half. But, I go through and just summarize. This is what this means. This is why this is in here. It was so helpful. I tell all attorneys that are interested in starting this practice, practice in this area, I'm like, start by reviewing first. And the other thing that not only are they big, long, complicated contracts, but different attorneys have different contracts. And so you had to get used to reading the same thing, but worded in different ways.
Yeah. It's like peeling the onion. Sure, of course, there has to be a contract, but then what about what she eats and
Yeah.
all of the what ifs that I'm
What if
like,
she dyes her hair? What if she
yeah,
won't agree not to dye her hair?
exactly.
What if
Yeah.
she's an exerciser? What if she's a weightlifter? What if she trains? Like, things you just never think about. And I always tell my clients, it's in here for a reason. It's in
Yeah.
here for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what if she gets pregnant with twins? But that's not with what you wanted to, the big ethical ones are in there too. So it's just, yeah, it's like the contracts are intense. Okay, wait. So you have been in surrogacy for about 10 years ish?
10, 15. Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. So you've probably seen an evolution because I feel like surrogacy just in the
Yes.
5 or 6 years that I've been aware of it has gone through an evolution. But I'm curious how, from your vantage point, how the relationship between agencies and attorneys have evolved since you've been in it.
Yeah, it's good because the agencies really view us as a team player with them. So I have agencies that will call me and say, "Hey, I have this situation. For example, I'm working with intended parents who are not married. Is that something that I should be worried about in Georgia?" And I'll tell them, that's not good for Georgia. We need intended parents to be married to each other in order to get a parentage order. They'll run scenarios by me and then they'll make the match, right? As opposed to before, we ran into some problems with they would match people that were not good matches and the fits weren't good. So agencies regularly call attorneys in the states where they're going to be working and get our opinion if it's a unique situation. Now if it's just standard normal, they know the drill, but if it's some kind of little quirky something or something they haven't seen, they're really good to call us, and that's great. They're also very helpful because as we go through contract negotiations with our clients, if we get to a place where there's an impasse, we can send them back to the agency and say, talk to your agency about this. See what your agency said. Maybe you misremembered something. Maybe this is not something that you talked about. And I find that the agencies are always willing to help. So I would say that the relationship is really good. One thing that I think we can improve on is helping agencies understand how we work. So we're at the very end of the process, right? And we're really, really important. But as lawyers, we don't like to do anything fast. Well, if you've been on a 2-year journey and you are getting to legal and we are the last thing you have to do, guess what you want? Fast, right?
Exactly.
Can you do that contract in 2 days? Can you draft a contract in a day and a half? Can you review it? And so we have to communicate to the agencies, set those expectations because we don't ever want anyone to sign a contract under duress. We don't want it to appear that they signed a contract under duress. You have to have had time to read and sleep on and digest and go back and read a 40, 50, 60-page contract before you can sign it. So we need to do a better job of letting agencies know this is how we work and this is why we work this way so that they don't think that we're just, sitting it over here on our desk, not taking a look at it just because it's in a pile somewhere.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that today too. Before we do that, I have kind of a dodo question that I'm just not aware of. In adoption, because you and I both come from the world of adoption, best practice is to have surrogate represented by somebody separate than the intended parent. Is that
Yes.
the same in surrogacy too?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Independent legal representation on both sides. So,
Okay.
I'm in Quad A,
Yeah.
and we have ethics that we have to abide by, and we try to do everything top notch, right? We don't want to take any shortcuts. And as attorneys, I can't represent people that could potentially have differing interests and have conflicts. So
Right.
we just start out with it. At every phase of the journey, there is a attorney for each side.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's talk about what good looks like. So, what does a seamless collaboration between agency and attorney look like in practice?
It starts with a good email, a good introduction. I'd like to refer this client to you, whether it be an intended parent or gestational carrier. They ask, what's your schedule like? What's your availability? They tell us the names of the parties so that we can run a conflict check. Even before that, I'll back up. The first step is the agency's making referrals to knowledgeable attorneys.
Right.
So that's super, super important is to refer to somebody that exclusively practices in this area of the law. So that's a great first step.
Can I ask one more dodo question?
Yeah.
Also, so he's like, are you working with agencies in Georgia? Or are you working with agencies all over the
You
United
can
States?
work all over. You can work international. You can work anywhere at all. Usually there's a touch point in Georgia, right? So I've either
Yeah.
got an intended parent in
I was gonna
Georgia
say.
or I've got a gestational carrier in Georgia. So then the agencies network with us. We go to conferences like Seeds. We get to meet the agencies and then they make the referrals.
Okay. Okay. So that was, I guess, my question was like, do you need to know Georgia law in order to
Yes. In
be
order
a
to be
contract?
involved in a surrogacy journey in Georgia, I think it's important that you know Georgia law. There's not a lot of Georgia law. There's very little Georgia law, but our law, if you will, in quotes, is developed through the contract, right? And we know what to put in the contracts because we know what the judges like and don't like. And ultimately, a judge has to enter a parentage order. And when you match at surrogacy, you actually know the terms of the match. You've discussed what's the base compensation going to be, what's the monthly allowance. They detail out the big items. And typically, we don't negotiate those a whole lot when we get to legal clearance because people are relying on that, right? Like if you say I'm going to pay someone 45,000, you don't get to legal and then raise it $10,000. That's
Right.
just not appropriate.
Okay, so agency builds a relationship with a reputable attorney that has experience in surrogacy. So that's number one. Number two, starts with an email. They send you names so you can run conflict, as much information as they have on these families. And then what?
So after that, they basically hand them to us and say, okay, we're ready to get started on legal. And so then we just have to talk and decide who's going to do what. We flip hats a lot. Sometimes I draft a contract, sometimes I review a contract, but the contract really comes first. So it's negotiation. I mean, there are times where go back and forth 2, 3, 4, 5 times on topics. Sometimes it's much longer than that. Sometimes it depends on the sophistication of the clients because a seasoned gestational carrier knows to ask for more things in a contract. You know, an intended parent that's done it before knows what was in their last contract. It ebbs and flows based on the specificity, is that what you say it?
Yeah.
Of the clients.
Okay, cool. And then it's kind of a handoff happens, and then you're going back and forth with the agency just to clarify anything.
You know, if I have a question, I go back to the agency. Otherwise, I really just kind of deal with the other attorney in the case. And agencies are good to check in. Like they'll check in. They don't drive you crazy, but every couple of weeks they'll say like, where are we at in the process? They really do a great job of keeping things moving. And the other thing that agencies do is they follow the ASRM guidelines. They do not take shortcuts and they do it right, which I end up doing consults with people all the time. And when people call me and they say, we've matched on social media and we don't want to use an agency, we want to save the money, I really push for like, it's really worth your money to use an agency because of the services that they provide. And they make sure there's escrow. They make sure there's an insurance review. I think most of the time when you hear horror stories in this industry, it's because people have taken shortcuts or people have not properly vetted somebody that they're working with. And that's when the accidents happen.
Yeah. And those stories have been abundant as of late.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, unfortunately. And,
Yeah.
it's sad because the good stories don't make the headlines, right? I mean,
Coming from the adoption world where that's been happening for a long time, it just like no one is publishing the happies.
I know. I know.
And I kind of get mad at the journals for it.
And listen, there are beautiful stories. I mean, a surrogate is not doing this for the money. That's sort of the bad rap surrogacy gets, right? And most people, by and far, they are building their family through surrogacy because they have they have to have a medical reason in most cases to do it this way, right? So they've struggled with infertility. They have had, illnesses that have caused them not to be able to carry children. They don't have what you need to carry children in their bodies. The stories are really touching, so much so that we have started asking the story to be told in the parentage hearing. So,
Good.
you get a judge that comes in and they're very formal, and then you have this, tell us why you decided to build your family through surrogacy. And the intended parents will start telling their story, and you can just see the judge, coming into the computer and nodding and listening. And the ice is melting as they hear the beautiful reasons behind it.
I know it's one of those things that it stores my faith in humanity
Hmm.
when you hear the majority of the stories. So, yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's go to the flip side. So, what bugs you when you're working with an agency and you're like, gosh, darn it, here we go again? What's uncoordinated? What do you have to follow up on constantly?
In my perfect world, I would get brought in earlier because I feel like gestational carriers get told when they're matching and they sign a match sheet. They basically sign off on a match sheet that's maybe 4 pages at most, that they can negotiate certain things at contract. So it's like they'll be told, okay, don't worry about that. You can negotiate that later. Well, then when we get to later, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not what the match sheet said. Our response is always, but the match sheet's not the contract, but there's a little bit of rub there. So it would be ideal if we could get brought in at that point, just so if something needs to be tweaked, it could. Example, at if you match and you are working a job where you get $17 your lost wages, it's going to be based on $17 an hour. And then a year and a half later, we're medically cleared, everything's on, we're ready for contract. You're making $35 an hour. We have a problem because I need for my client, the gestational carrier, to get fully compensated for the time she's going to be off work. And if an intended parent was relying on a $17 an hour lost wage, you can see the problem, right? So I also think, though, this is something that we can collaborate better on with agencies where they know what kind of things we are having to negotiate
Yes.
at contract, and maybe they will know better, like, "Hey, let's don't put that in our match sheets. Let's just say to be determined by pay stubs at the time," or something of that nature,
Well, can we get tactical on that? What should agencies consult an attorney for on the match sheet or at that part of the process?
Well, evaluating the match, so knowing whether the intended parents need to be married, that's big. Knowing
In
whether
Georgia.
in Georgia. Now,
Yeah.
it's not everywhere, absolutely not everywhere. The other thing that's big for Georgia is for them to know is that are the couple going to be present at the birth of the child? That's big with international IPs. Like there was a trend for a while where they would send somebody to get their baby, and Georgia doesn't love that. I had a case where they called social services, and I had to have a 6-hour hearing to get the intended parent's baby out of foster care because the hospital got uncomfortable with the situation. So, I think we can do better on that as far as we're going to do some education for some agencies and kind of talk to them about, "Hey, this makes it difficult for us at legal if we can't negotiate this because you've already previously agreed to that." Being consistent with their travel restrictions is super, super helpful. So, me knowing that this is always what this agency prefers and they have communicated it to the clients, that is really big.
What do you mean by that?
So, like, I know one certain agency I work with is always going to say, after 25 weeks, here's where we don't want you to go. And so, if the carrier gets to me at contract and says, well, I thought it was like 29 weeks, I know this agency's always 25. Like, I know what to expect. So, it's not really a problem. It's really a good thing. Most agencies don't change their patterns, they're
Yeah.
consistent. So, another thing is don't give the gestational carrier unrealistic expectations. If you know we're not gonna ever budge on this term, don't tell them they can negotiate that at legal. Because when we are trying to negotiate it and you're saying, well, that's not what was in the match sheet, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Understanding gross versus net. So that's a big deal too. Like, is she going to get gross lost wages, net lost wages, helping her understand the difference between gross and net?
Yeah.
Look, and gestational
What's
carriers
standard on that? I'm just curious.
I see a lot of gross. It kind of goes back and forth. So, like, I used to see gross, then I saw net. Now I'm seeing gross again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, interesting. But, I think for agencies, they have a lot of influence over gestational carriers and intended parents and helping them understand the personality of gestational carriers and like their Enneagram, like they are all mostly they are not going to be advocating for themselves. They're pleasers. They're doing this out of the goodness of their heart. And so sometimes I have to say, no, we have to advocate for this because this may not bug you now, but it's going to bug you later. And just having agencies know that the personality and the makeup and the mindset of a carrier is not gonna be to push back. I think that's something that needs to be considered and they need to be educated on too.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Are there tools, like digital tools that you're using in your practice to either manage a relationship or streamline contract development that it would be helpful if agencies also used, or even like communications tools? Or is it mainly just send me an email with all the information and then I'm going to dump it into my systems?
Yeah.
And okay.
For me, it's more like that. For me, it's just, give me the information, send me the match sheets, send me what I they know what I need. Usually that I do not have to go back and ask them repeatedly for things. They know the drill. So they know exactly what to send and they've done their homework. So escrow is lined up, insurance is reviewed, and then it just is just talking to the clients about what goes into the contract and then talking to the clients about their version of how fair this contract feels to them.
Yeah, and then what's an appropriate amount of time for you? And I'm sure it's like, "Build me a house." And you're like, "Well, do you want a mansion or a log cabin?" But what's an appropriate amount of time-ish? range-ish for agencies to park in their overall process for the legal?
Would say if you're asking an attorney to draft an agreement, you ought to give them 3 to 4 weeks at least. If you're asking someone to review agreements with the gestational carrier or intended parent, then they should be able to do that in 1 to 2 weeks in Georgia. Now, in other states, there aren't as many attorneys that are doing surrogacy, and so sometimes their wait list to draft is 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And that's why that communication is so important, right? Before you make the referral, reach out to say, hey, what's your availability? Everybody wants to move fast, which is understandable, but it's hard if I know I'm going to be out of town at a conference for a week, then yeah, that's if I've told you 2 weeks, you need to know, but that 2 weeks won't start till I come back, right?
Yeah. That could be technology that could help as some kind of, like, scheduling portal for you.
Ooh, interesting. I
Just
hadn't thought
just
about
something.
that.
Yeah.
You're always thinking, you're
I
good.
know, I know. Okay, so do you have examples or anything that comes to mind in terms of, like, where something went wrong?
Yeah, so I had a case where a carrier realized mid-journey that the intended parents were working with multiple gestational carriers unbeknownst to her and had in the number more than 20 children. And
This isn't that LA family, is it? It was.
yes, it was.
Wow.
And anyway, without disclosing names or confidences, I would just say that despite the contract saying there would be a pre-birth order, there was no pre-birth order obtained. Yeah. My client, I represented her in the contract phase, so not in the parentage action, but yeah, it was really bad. So as a result of cases like that, we have upped our intake forms. We have questions in our intake forms that require us to ask, are you working with any other surrogates right now? How many children do you have? How many children do you have through surrogacy?
What
We
do you
ask,
Sheriann, okay, I'm so curious about this now because that, like, if I am trying to deceive people, I'm like, "I don't have any."
yeah, you're right. I mean, but at least we're asking, right? Because if you're not asking, then it's, now that we're on notice, we need to ask because we now know that that could be happening. The other safeguard that we've put in is we want people in the academy to go face to face with their clients. So I need to see you. If I'm representing you, I don't need to just talk to you on phone. I need to see your face. I need to get a copy of your ID. I'm going to see your visa if you're international to know that you have a visa that's going to allow you to come pick up your baby. I'm going to ask the hard questions. If you aren't fluent in English, I'm going to get you an interpreter and make sure you understand. This is not an industry for shortcuts, right? At
No.
all. Now, if there is deception, I would say that you're also causing emotional distress for a gestational carrier or vice versa. There's a civil claim that could be there too. So, not just breaching a contract, but civil damages.
Yeah, to me, the only way to make this completely safe for people is to share data amongst agencies. And it wouldn't have to be all the data but just something identifying so that if that family was working with so many different GCs, that it would flag something.
Would love to think of a way. I mean, unfortunately, bad actors can be pretty smart and figure out
I know.
ways to break the rules no matter how many safeguards you have. But I mean, clearly this industry needs regulation, right? So,
Yeah.
New York has a great law and the agencies have to be licensed. And I think in a lot of cases where you hear horror stories, they're not licensed, they're not regulated. And then after the fact, you find out, ooh, something wasn't right, but we had no way of knowing it. So
Yeah. Well, that's one of the questions I have for you is in terms of regulation. So making sure that agencies are licensed, I think.
making sure they're following the ASRM guidelines. They're there for a reason. Working doing it working with attorneys that not attorneys that are in California that want Georgia lawyers to just be of counsel and just that means California lawyers doing a Georgia order or petition for parentage, and then we know that's problematic because we see it. It's not what our courts are used to. It's not how our courts are used to seeing it done because the rules are different in all the states. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not federally regulated, and so it varies from state to state. Virginia's got different requirements than Georgia and then Florida. So keeping having a connecting piece other than the clinic. I mean, I'm very pro If the gestational carrier or the intended parent are in Georgia, they need a Georgia attorney. If just the clinic is in Georgia, I don't feel comfortable drafting those contracts. I don't feel comfortable being involved in parentage because I don't know the law in that state. Does that make sense?
The law in the state where the IPs or the surrogate are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. So, are there other laws that you see like, "Oh, this is coming for sure?"
When I'm talking about licensing and regulation and surrogacy, I'm talking about having rules in place that say a gestational carrier has to have an attorney, an intended parent has to have a separate attorney. There needs to be always has to be an escrow agency. This is what has to be in place for counseling. This is what has to be in place for insurance, and just nail down those terms where people can't take shortcuts. That's the kind of regulation I would like to see.
Yeah, I do too. And coming off of the Seeds conference, we also heard in the shadows of the Seeds conference, like Seeds is wonderful, but the policing of the guidelines feels a little loose.
I think that's a general sentiment of people is like there are people who are willing to take shortcuts, unfortunately. And I know if there's one thing I'm saying is when you take shortcuts, that's what leads to problems. And it's going to shut surrogacy down if we
Mhm.
aren't careful.
Yeah, like it's great to have laws, but if you don't have the police who enforce the laws, then people will start breaking the law. And I know agencies are probably like eye roll, ugh, about getting licensed, but I do think it's going to help the surrogacy industry stay afloat and ethical and be here for the longer term.
Yeah. And I think too, like a lot of these agencies wouldn't have any problem getting licensed. Why? Because they
Right.
do it the right way. They're doing the right things. I mean, and even if you don't do licensing, if it's just that the laws like New York, that's a great set of laws to look at and aspire to because it just protects all parties.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to when agencies aren't prepared properly. Are there instant red flags that you see?
Really, there's more of like, don't work with this agency. So there's a networking that goes on between attorneys. And so when we have bad experiences with agencies, we will tell our colleagues, like, I had a really bad experience with that agency. First of all, we're very collegial. So nobody wants an agency that is going to be pushy, bossy, rude, that just right off the bat, right? Then the other thing is that we are busy. And as lawyers, all don't just sit behind a desk every day. So set the expectations for the clients and explain to them how important legal is and why legal can't get rushed. And the other thing is, like, if a gestational carrier comes to you and says, my attorney wants me to consider this because she or he thinks that's best for me, if you can't be neutral in this situation, don't walk it back. In other words, I've had carriers that had really valid things they needed. Like one had needed an extra seat on the airplane because her husband was really tall and they just needed more room when she was going out to the embryo transfer. And the agency sort of tried to talk her out of it. And this was something that somebody else at the agency had said, no, that won't be a problem. And then I would say, well, if you really want that, we need to get you that. And then they would go talk to the agency and then she'd be like,
Oh.
okay, I don't need it. It's fine. Do not let them go for a transfer. Do not let them go for a transfer if that contract is not signed by all parties.
Wait, what? They do? Why would they ever do
Well, they
that?
won't do the transfer. The clinic will not do the transfer, but sometimes clients go across the country to different clinics to do an embryo transfer. And I've had some situations where some agencies were like, well, we've already booked the flight. We're sure to get that contract signed. No, 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 no. That is not appropriate. Don't say we already have a date for medical. We already have a date. We want to do the transfer. So now you have to meet our deadline because we've already lined that up. And then, of course, don't do anything until everybody's been medically screened so we know that it's gonna actually move forward. But in my experience, you see more problems with independent journeys than agency journeys. I feel like on the whole that you deal with better agencies. And, of course, social media is huge too. There's Facebook groups where if you're a bad actor, people are going to put your name in a post and say, "Don't work with this agency, don't work with this attorney."
So are you working with families on independent journeys?
The ones that I enjoy that are independent are the truly compassionate ones where it's a sister. She's not going to get compensation. They're going to help cover all the cost. Those are much easier. Although As with anything, sometimes things with family goes south more than anything else, right? Like, nobody fights like family. So they still need to be under contract. I would still recommend them to get escrow if at all possible. But I would say maybe 75% of my work is in agency work and then 25 independent.
Are the independent journeys can they use the agencies for case management? Because that would be dreamy, wouldn't it?
Yes. So I did learn at Seeds that some agencies do offer that service. So if they've matched on their own, they've already done a lot of the legwork, because the agencies know there's just so much more to it than the independent people can ever understand or imagine.
Yeah.
They know what they can offer. And so now they're sort of doing like a hybrid.
Great.
And I think there's a list that's gonna be generated or that may even be out there that's gonna have that, and that'll help save people cost.
Yeah, that's really smart for agencies to do. Well, it's smart for everybody. You mentioned escrow, and so I'm just
Mhm.
curious about your point of view. And I know, of course, yes, there've been the headlines about the bad actors and escrow, but I just think it's funny because it's actually not escrow. Like none of the escrow companies are actually escrow companies.
I think that's the first thing. We probably
Yes.
need to look at the name, and we have that is underway in some areas where we're saying, "Is this really the way it's supposed to work?" But regardless, it is very important to have somebody that is bonded and insured
Yeah.
hold the money.
Yes.
We don't like to think about worst case scenario, but if a gestational carrier is pregnant and something happens to the intended parents, she's got to still get paid.
Yeah.
We don't wanna hear, "Oh, I'm sorry, we ran out of money.
Right.
We had to spend that money we had in our bank account that was earmarked for you, you know, we can't pay you now." So, I think escrow is always just the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just curious, like, why the companies in surrogacy don't actually become traditional escrow as opposed to just like, basically money managers that are
Yeah, that's a
insured.
great question. I don't know, maybe you need to get, Adam on with Seed
I
Trust
do.
and
I'm gonna get
ask
Adam on
him.
this. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm curious about that. Like, why don't you just build traditional escrow
yeah.
if we're calling it escrow?
Right, well, and that's the thing, we're like, "Well, maybe we shouldn't call it escrow if it's
Right.
really not escrow," but, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So did we cover enough? I'm trying to think, like in terms of agencies need to hear this from Sheriann.
Do not bring lawyers in too late. I would say, please, please,
What
please.
is too late? Like what's too late?
So if a gestational carrier achieves pregnancy, I like to start working on pre-birth orders, parentage petitions. People call them different things, but around 15 weeks. There's a lot of moving parts. It's actually in Georgia a lawsuit that has to be filed. It has to be served on vital records, hospital general counsel, the other party to the case, whether it's the intended parent, gestational carrier. They all have to sign things. I got to get a medical affidavit signed. And so there's lots of things that have to come back, right, to me. If you come to me at 20 weeks and you say, I'm ready to start, I'm going to tell you, I don't know if I can get you an order pre birth. And heaven forbid there's an emergency, we are going to be scrambling.
Meaning
Now,
if they come to you when the surrogate is 20 weeks along.
yeah, it's way
Okay.
too late. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say by and far, most agencies know that. Knowing that in when they re-engage attorneys for the parentage part, making sure that if I'm representing the intended parents, that the GC has an attorney in place so that we can hit the ground running. That's super important. Or you know, get it lined up, get the referrals out. Because sometimes I'll have a GC in a different state and a contract was drafted by an attorney in that state that can't practice in Georgia, right? So they're in North Carolina, they can't come to Georgia to do parentage. So there's a handoff. But we need to make sure the agency is paying attention to that handoff so that they can say, "Hey, gestational carrier, you have to get a new attorney now. And here's a list of a couple of names that you could use," and then let her make her choice.
Okay. How often are these happening across state lines?
A lot happen across state lines. So oftentimes they already have a relationship with an attorney, right? So they decide to build their family through surrogacy. They want to consult with an attorney. They meet with that attorney, and that attorney is going to give them advice and make recommendations. And if that attorney can draft a contract for them, and if it's cheaper or it makes more sense from an efficiency standpoint, I don't technically have a terrible problem with that. But when it comes to parentage, I do want to make sure that we're not just being brought in of counsel or asked to domesticate something. I feel pretty strongly that you ought to have attorneys in that state drafting the parentage, getting the orders, and working with the parties.
Because just what if? Like, just
Right.
what ifs? Everybody wants to sleep at night.
Yeah.
The attorneys in that state know the courts, know the judges, and that stuff matters.
Well, think about it. In Georgia, there's not a large amount of us that do this work. So the
Yeah,
judges see us regularly,
yeah,
and they trust us. They know that what we're bringing to them is right. And so if you bring them something that's crazy, it's just like, what are you doing here? Why is this a mess?
yeah, yeah, and that's where you're like, "My brother's friend is an attorney, he can draft the contract," and you're like, "Oh god, no."
No, if that happens, I'll say I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not even doing
exactly.
it.
Yeah, okay.
Not even
We
doing it.
have one final question for you, and we call it the magic wand. So the question is, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in terms of how agencies and attorneys work together in surrogacy, what would it be?
Would say bring us in earlier.
Okay.
Just bring us in a little earlier.
And 15 weeks, when a GC is 15 weeks, that's the
Get that, get going on parentage. That's right.
okay. I have one more kind of random question because do a lot of agencies have attorneys in-house like we saw in adoption?
Yeah, we see that from time to time. That can be kind of hard, to be honest, because if they have an attorney in house and that attorney is writing the contract, many times when I edit the contract, I have to do more work than if I just did it myself because I'm reading something, I'm having to interpret it. I'm like, the others have in-house that do a fine job, and they basically just say, "We have in-house." They tell you up front, "We have in-house. We have someone that's gonna draft it. Can you reduce your fee?" And you just review it and add Georgia law. And for the ones who have got really good contracts, I don't mind doing that. But for one that says, "Well, we're gonna save you time and give you a contract that we drafted," it can be hard because I end up spending more time on that contract than if I just use my own contract, right?
Right. Okay, that's helpful.
The other thing I'd say is don't set the legal fees. Like, you need to understand my fee in Georgia may be different than somebody's fee in New York, may be different than Virginia. So, ask. I have people all the time, and I love it. They're like, "Can you send me a fee sheet?" Sure. Here's what I charge. Here is what you can expect to see from me unless the law changes in Georgia. And so that's much better than telling somebody it should cost X and then them coming and finding out actually costs double X, right?
Right. That's never a surprise that anybody wants.
No, no. And I'll just say fair warning. I do these at flat rates. I think to do them hourly, that's not industry trend, industry standard, if you will, at least not in Georgia. Most people have figured out what it costs, how much time it takes, and they can do it that way.
And so are you saying that's a red flag if an agency is looking for an attorney, like, run if you see somebody telling you it's gonna be hourly?
I should have said this was my magic, what'd you call it? Magic
Your magic
wand?
wand? Yeah.
Use quad A attorneys.
Yeah.
Like, use quad A attorneys that regularly practice in this area. The hardest cases I have are where there are people that family law attorneys, they'll just say, I do family law. I can do a contract. And can you send me a contract? Can you get one off AI? No, you cannot. It is not something that can be generated through AI. It is going to be wrong if it is.
Yes. Yeah.
And here's another thing, and this is similar to adoptions because people used to say, "Can you send me a form for this?" Well, I don't really have a form contract because my contract is going to change based on the circumstances of each and every case. So I heard a story when I was at a conference a while back where an attorney said she got a contract to review on behalf of her client. And as soon as she looked at it, she's like, "This is my contract." And she said, "I wasn't upset because it was my contract, but it was my contract that was 4 years old." We are constantly updating our stuff. Like, we go to a conference, we come back, we sit down and we say, "What do we need to put in, take out?" I did Seeds did a podcast yesterday that I watched, and I have 10 points of things that I learned yesterday from an escrow agency's point of view that I'm going to put in my contract. So It's just not safe to just go find one and use one. Get a mentor. Ask somebody that does this regularly. Hey, could I help you on a case? Can I do some small things for you on a case? Could I sit in on a review with you? And then potentially, can you share your contract? Now, don't start with, hey, I want to do this area of the law. Will you share a contract with me? That won't go over.
Yeah. Or steal one online that's 4 years old. Yeah, that I can see how that would
Exactly.
be huge.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Okay. Well, you can have those 2 magic wands then.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so if people wanna find you, Sheriann, where do they go?
You can go to www.thehickslawgroup.com. That's my husband and I's website. Instagram, Sheriann Hicks. I've been posting TikTok videos lately just because I think they're fun.
But are you doing dance routines?
No dance routines. No 6'7". I don't even know what that means. Actually, I've only posted a couple, so far so good. But
Okay, we'll link all that in the show notes so people can find you really easy. But
okay,
thank
great.
you, Sheriann. This has been good, and hopefully this helps some agencies that are trying to plan appropriately and make sure their attorneys are also happy in this process. Poor agencies are keeping so many people happy in this process.
Well, it's hard to keep them happy because you're talking about all sorts of sensitive things, right?
I
Money, a family. I mean, things that matter the most to people.
I know.
Listen, anytime an agency needs to reach out to me, that is a phone call that I'm happy to take.
Okay, good. Well, we will put all the Sheriann stuff in the show notes, and I would encourage all agencies, especially the ones in Georgia, to reach out if you're not already working with her. So thank you,
Well,
Sheriann.
thank you. It's good to see you. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to The Future of Surrogacy. If you liked today's episode, send it to a friend or a colleague that should hear it. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to keep up with new episodes and behind-the-scenes updates. And if there's a topic you want us to cover or someone you think we should talk to, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.